one specific point that you focused on that I really appreciated, because we have a lot of questions that have come in from evolutionists.
Good.
It's a common one. They'll argue for their position by looking to homology, right? Similarities across the biological world.
Yeah.
I like to say, creationists, we can explain the similarities due to common design, common templates, but it's the differences that make all the difference. Creationists, we can explain, right, Brian, similarities and differences.
Right.
The evolutionists, they struggle with the differences because many of those differences are too massive for them to account for. One that you pointed to were the differences in the genomes of humans and chimpanzees, specifically the Y chromosome. What's interesting, before I get into the Y chromosome, is the genome as a whole. Even in your sections that are similar between humans and chimpanzees, there's differences in the way those genes are regulated, the way they're used, the way they're expressed. So even in the similar regions, there's massive differences that they can't account for. Like in the brain, for example, our genes are regulated much different than the chimpanzee. But the Y chromosome that you touched on, the Y chromosome, when you consider overall architecture, size differences, and gene content, Brian, I wanted to show you in the audience an image because your points on that were fantastic. And going back years ago, 2013, 2012, you pointed to a couple papers from Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins.
Yes.
PhD geneticist. And so the Y chromosomes were thought to be roughly 35, maybe 40% similar back then. And it's really cool because you can see on this visual, and I appreciate all the visuals in your presentation. I think that's helpful for me, for the audience. I'm a visual learner, Brian, my brother. And so here you've got the great ape Y chromosomes all compared. They got humans in here, of course. They think we're a great ape, but the differences are too large. And so these are Y chromosomes. Notice your human Y right here versus the chimpanzee Y. Right off the bat, it's half the size.
Wow.
Gene content, totally different. This right here, this is, I mean, this alone precludes evolution. What that means is it makes evolution impossible, because how can the evolutionary model account for these differences? This piece of DNA here, it's all color coded. This is called heterochromatin. This is densely packed DNA, largely comprises satellite sequences. It's functional, it's beneficial. You'll notice the heterochromatic arm in the chimpanzee is not even there, but yet humans have a ton of it.
Wow.
Totally different. And so the evolutionary community, they like to argue from a nested hierarchical pattern, right? Why are humans more similar to chimpanzees than any other creature? Well, in the Y chromosome, this is cherry picking, because in the Y chromosome, you'll actually notice, Brian, the human Y is more similar to the gorilla Y over here than either are to the chimpanzee Y and the bonobo Y. There's a break in their so-called nested hierarchy. So my point is, and this brings me to my first question to you, Brian. It's the differences that make all the difference. So they want to argue, and I'll put up one of the questions here, and we do appreciate our critics. Okay.
Yeah.
So here, an honest doubter. We appreciate our critics, the feedback, the skepticism, and we're here to engage your questions and challenges. So he says, not that I believe it proves evolution. So he's, I think, basically saying this is just a supporting line of evidence, perhaps, because the evolutionary community, they'll say it's cumulative. We have this evidence, this piece of evidence over here, and it comes together to one conclusion, common descent, they'll say. And so he says, but what is your explanation for simians being most similar biologically to mankind more than any other creature? Is it the same template? So yeah, in other words, Brian, the question is, why are humans more similar in many ways, genetically, morphologically, in anatomy, to the great apes and monkeys than any other form of life, like dogs or fish?
I would say that's the way God made them. That's the way God made us. You know, God's got a great imagination. As if you know, when you look at all the animals in the world, what an amazing imagination he has with the colors and the design. So I would just say that's God's design, how he wanted it.
Amen. Amen. And you could do the same thing with man-made objects. Take modes of transportation. They're designed by man, human engineers, but we could do the same thing. We could take all sedans, hatchbacks, and let's say a boat or an airplane. Well, it just so happens there's a nested hierarchy there, isn't there, Brian? Where sedans are more similar to hatchbacks than they are to a boat or an airplane. So I would say hierarchies, the fact that humans are more similar to chimps than they are to even monkeys, dogs, or fish, that's characteristic of design. As you said, that's the way God created. He created the biological order hierarchically. And Brian, if you were to pick an animal in the biological world, doesn't that animal then have to be more similar to another creature than to other creatures? Like, isn't that just basic? Isn't that just by definition, any creature has to be more similar to something than it is to another?
Well, if you said pick an animal, I would say the platypus. That's what popped into my mind.
Yeah.
You
There's an
know,
interesting mosaic.
it's like, well, that came from everything. You know, I think God did that just to make the evolutionists scratch their head. It's like, man, this theory really doesn't work for that one.
Right, just to show how silly evolutionary theory is.
Right.
We have a friend of the channel here. It's a critic, but you know what, Lorraine? Allow us to keep working on you, and you'll be a creationist in no time. So she proves my point here, Brian. She says, well, let's look at the X chromosomes. Sure.
Oh, good. Yeah. What's that? 69% similar, 59% similar.
Yeah. So even if they're more similar to each other, so they are right here. So they are more, the X chromosomes are more similar to each other in humans and chimps than the Ys. You can see that visually. But my whole point is, and the point we're trying to make as creationists, is similarities do not equate ancestry or common descent. Similarities can go either way. It's agnostic. It's like saying, well, creation is true or evolution is true, Brian, because the sky is blue or the earth is round. Well, largely both models can account for the data. It's the differences that make all the difference. How do the evolutionists, Brian, explain these massive differences in Y chromosomes in just 6 to 10 million years since the split? And this is what I really wanted to show you, Brian. In 2024, so Dr. Carl Werner, he said 2024 was the year. Yeah. And you pointed this out in your presentation brilliantly.
Yeah.
2024 was the year that evolution was overturned. And he's so right in many ways. So we had Carl on for a 3-part series.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So I highly recommend people check it out.
Yeah.
It was comprehensive. It was informative, and it was irrefutable. That series, we've had it out now for about 6 months. And the critics, which we get a lot of them, they have not been able to counter it. They have not been able to engage it.
No, they can't. They cannot. Those books are so well documented. I mean, his bibliography is like 300 pages. He's translated it all. It's just, yeah, he did a lot of work, and I can't see how they could refute it. I do not see how. Yeah.
No, they can't. They can't. Well documented. The evidence really is fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
And so in the world of genetics, right here, 2024, they got even more sophisticated data and analyses of the Y chromosomes, Brian. And did it get better for the evolutionists? No, it actually got worse. So if you compare down here, I'll just hide this. Human. So here's your human, and here's your chimpanzee. So you can go right up and compare each one. 26.2%. And so your human Y chromosomes and your chimpanzee Y chromosomes, they're less than 30% the same. So with more sophisticated Y chromosomal sequencing data, Brian, and I hope the evolutionists are listening, it's actually worse. It's worse for them. And so these kinds of differences, they preclude their theory or
Right.
their philosophy from being true.
Wow. Wow. That's stunning. You know, and yet they still have that 1.6% in the textbook today. It's like, oh, it just so frustrating. So frustrating. But, you know, it's a lot of fun getting people up to speed, because when you can connect the dots for them, they'll never see the world the same again. And who knows
Amen.
what, and who knows who they'll be. Maybe that's the next Ken Ham. Maybe it's the next, you know, whoever. But wow. Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah, when they
exciting.